Hey there, how you doing? And welcome to Weird Spins. I'm at the airport waiting for a flight to come down. It's going to be a little while, so I have an opportunity to record an introduction to the new line of videos that commences with this video. I've been in the past doing Shellac Sundays for a little while. I did that, which was basically playing a side of a 78 RPM disc and going over some of the information about the artist, things like that. I haven't done that for a while, basically because time was getting in the way and because I haven't had an opportunity to even explore a great deal of the stuff that I've actually acquired in doing some of these rescues of 78 RPM discs. Finally, I came up with an idea where I might keep the channel a bit more active by sharing a lot of the stuff that I have that can go streaming online unedited and without problems, so that I can actually not just share a collection with you, I can literally share the content of the collection, the recorded content with you, because much of this stuff is old and in some way or another has lapsed where I'm not going to get copyright claimed on it. So I may as well have fun with that. So basically, at this point, with all these rescues, I'm sitting on probably close to 700 or 800 78 RPM records, and probably at least 40 to 50% of those are already in a status where I can share. So I'm kind of excited about that. Some of the material is going to be humorous. Some of it is going to be very joyful, because there's a lot of really neat, as you've heard in some of the more recent Shellac Sundays, upbeat, roaring 20s kind of stuff that it's like small scale. It's not like the big band, but it's just moving all the time. It's very, very happy, and has an almost ragtime kind of quality to it, but more blaring than that. So it's a lot of fun, and some of it is going to be more ballad oriented, often very culturally related, because you'll find recordings from vaudeville performers that are distinctly Irish, that are distinctly Scottish, that are distinctly from all these different cultures that were coming into America at the time. And some of it is downright haunting and eerie. I mean, you'll hear these records and the crackle that's there just kind of adds to the atmosphere of it, where you can picture it echoing down the hallways of the Overlook Hotel with Jack Nicholson's silhouette at the end of the hall. So all of this is stuff that I figure, while I upload it, I can be sharing it with you for the first time at the same time I'm experiencing it. So while it's been fun on the overall collection videos, going over things like patent wars and different special edition colors and neat labels like the Vogue Picture Record Company and things like that, I won't be digging so deep into who these artists are. You're welcome to do that yourself. I will tell you that probably at least 20%, 10 to 20% of what I've gotten in this bunch that's greater than a century old has not been on Discogs. So I've been adding a lot of titles to the Discogs discography itself, because Discogs is not a discography, but the more that we can contribute to it, the more complete it becomes. And that might mean that some of these recordings are extraordinarily rare, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily have any value. I may actually have the only existing copy in the world on some of this stuff. There's no way of knowing that, to my knowledge. I know that there are resources that keep up with known to exist copies of certain records and things, especially where blues is concerned, but I haven't found very much of anything that kind of leans in that direction. I'd like to, but I haven't. But what I have found is still very, very interesting, sometimes even historic, like when I uploaded the Moonshines on the Moonshine on New Year's Eve, because it was about desperation to find a drink, and it was a novelty recording that was posted, published and given to the world in the wake of the country going into Prohibition. So there's some really, really neat stuff like that. All right, so before I go forward, I wanted to share a little bit of my backstory, because I haven't really done that so far, as how it is that I came to be more interested in a lot of things that are very old and nostalgic like this, and the old time radio programs. And thank you so much for those that have given me positive comments and feedback and have been enjoying the old time radio that I've posted. When I was small, I first got into music and record collecting and everything on my own, just obsessing around the house. And there was a man across the street from us who was getting a little bit older, and his daughters were in the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra, and they were very heavily tied to everything that went on in public radio and television in the area. And that probably influenced me to later on wind up working in public radio and television in the area, as well as my going through all of the tinkering around with things in different formats and having open reel tape and understanding Baroque music and appreciating classical and the opera and all of that. That came from him. Later on, finding jazz and things like that and swing, that came from exposure that came from visiting an uncle on vacation. And my sister is where I got my rock and roll. My sister is me digging through her records and checking out Epitaphs Outside the Law and Gun, I think she had before I had it, and Peter Frampton and Kiss and all that stuff. So later on, then I was digging deeper into it, and I was getting into Sabbath, and because I liked all things spooky. And being the flea market kid, I've told that story, how it is that I became a vendor when I was very small and was actually buying, selling, trading, and checking out all the records that way. Well, going on vacation when you're an ADHD and autism spectrum undiagnosed child with your family, you take every conceivable resource with you to keep your racing mind occupied, especially when you're going and driving long distances. So Dad's behind the wheel, and we're going every year pretty much to Texas, and I would take a little portable phonograph with me because you never know, I might find an interesting record at the pharmacy that was in Winsboro, Texas along the way or something, and I would have a way to play it. And I always had this portable 8-track with me that I would take in the back seat with a one-piece ear cup. And that was me listening to Electric Light Orchestra and Sabbath and Emerson, Lake and Palmer on 8 tracks because I was already collecting when we would go to Texas. Finally, one year, my mother weighed in that she wanted to go see her brother. And her brother lived in Nebraska. So we had never met our Uncle Bill. Uncle Bill, William Blumenthal, was a fascinatingly unique human being. He was a true hillbilly. He wore blue overalls every single day because he had an injury to his abdomen when he was young that left his mid portion kind of open, so he had to wear a special harness to kind of contain himself, from what I understand, so that stuff didn't spill out. He looked like a mad Santa Claus with a long white beard that was caked with stains because he chewed tobacco, and he had Bell's palsy, so as his head would shake, he would miss the spittoon or whatever he was aiming at and wind up with this tobacco juice in his beard, and it would stain it over time. A side note to that story, the reason his beard is short here, you can't see the end of it, but it was absolutely square. It was flat on the end, like ZZ Top. And his explanation to us as to where did the rest of your beard go, because it had been down to his waist before, was apparently that he caught it on fire lighting kerosene lanterns and grabbed a butcher knife or a carving knife and hacked it off to keep his face from getting burned. I don't know if that's true or not, but that is what he told us. He lived off of the edge of the Platte River in Nebraska, buried deep down the woods, where it was nice and creepy, like the beginning of Evil Dead, where the house, when you're going down the road to get to his house, you're driving for probably 3 or 4 miles of dirt road that's so narrow that the branches of the trees are literally dragging and scraping down the sides of the car as you went past, making these god-awful noises, and it was kind of eerie out there. And then when you finally got to the place, it was even more eerie because basically he had tragically on property a shack that was like a little cabin that was the home that my mother initially grew up in, and it was a burned out ruin. And that was burned out because they had been attacked by Nazi sympathizers in this country when they were kids. So that was still on property. He had another cabin that had been built out there, and no electricity, no running water. The pump was so old that you would have to prime it. So since he's near the riverbed, and it was at this time of year, it was just a riverbed, they would dam it off so it just goes down to nothing but a bunch of towheads and puddles everywhere. And if we were lucky, we could find like 2 to 3 feet deep water somewhere in a patch, and we'd go get a bucket of water and bring it back, put it under the pump, and then start pumping because it would create a vacuum like a siphoning hose to get the water started so it would come out. Then you could get fresh water out of there and boil it or whatever you needed to do, or bathe. It was fine for drinking water once it was cleared and all of that. So that's how we got water. He had pet coyotes. Yes, one was half coyote and the other was just a coyote. And they were great protectors, actually, from other coyotes in the area. He was a professional trapper. So when you walk outside, there's like billy goats climbing up on everything, including the cars and the roofs of the sheds and everything else, and these animal skins hanging off of them. So now it's getting really, for kids, even more eerie. But because he was a hunter and trapper by trade, and that's where he made a side hustle money living out there, where he would buy some of his canned goods and stuff. We got to eat all kinds of inconceivable things to most city people. So, I mean, with the Texans, had I known what I was eating, I probably would have found it more disagreeable, but I didn't know what I was eating till after the fact. I ate snake and I ate squirrel. But with my Uncle Bill, and this is not parody slang, I ate beaver. In fact, I ate beaver burgers. So there you go. Because when the water was being towed up, they were withholding it and damming it up in a human dam. The beavers were still doing what nature does and making little dams and traps by just chew everything up in the riverbeds. My sister got hit by a skunk in that riverbed one night. So that was another part of the great adventure of this. But there's no electricity, no running water. There's an outhouse outside. We're living by kerosene light, and if it does get cold at night, then he's got a cast iron wood stove that is what he cooks on, with the pipe going up through the ceiling. One end of the cabin had collapsed at some point, so he had taken a trailer and crammed it through the back of it and sawed the wall off of the end of that, and then done something to kind of overlap it and meld it together so that water didn't leak in. And his pet horse would come in wanting a sugar cookie through the back door, and then he'd have to offer the horse a cookie to get it to walk all the way through and out the front door because it couldn't back up down the little steps. So that's how eccentric this guy was. Likely as a result of the trauma that he would have experienced as a young man. He was older than my mother, but he would have still been young. From the incidents with local Nazi sympathizers, he defied his name, his heritage, his roots, just as she had. She had taken on Catholicism and under parental guidance, and he had avowed himself to be an atheist. However, he also still was someone who was susceptible to propaganda, because he had an absolute meltdown when my mother and I, on a hike, found hemp that was growing wild in one of the pastures. Now, the government used to grow it out there in the farmlands because they would use it during war times to make rope and other things. It was not a drug-grade hemp. It was basically only good for textiles and things like that. But apparently, even if it couldn't mess up a human, the cattle were blasted on it. They were having a great time out there eating this stuff up. And they were not acting normal. They were really, really gone. But when he got wind of it, he went out there and threw a tantrum and spent, I'd say, the better part of a day hacking this stuff down and making a bonfire out of it, because it completely freaked him out. However, all you have to know about the area is that next season they would unleash the dam, let the waters rise, the same as they always do, that flooded his house. That would find the seeds, redistribute them in the field, and in a year or two, the stuff was going to be right back. So it was a futile fight, and that's why it was still thriving out there. This wasn't stuff that was planted by somebody. Nobody was growing anything trying to be a hemp farmer out there. It was illegal at the time. It was just wild from when it had been there before, and now you couldn't get rid of it. It's called weed for a reason. I come along out there, and I'm used to having my things and constantly obsessed with music and falling in love with all of the musical things in the house and with his musical abilities, because he played the accordion and he was a true maestro at it. He played, he had an organ in the front room, and it was a bellowed organ, so you had to work pedals back and forth on the floor to push air into it in order to be able to make noise, much like a calliope, I suppose, works that way. And he was very good at all of this. But he was a curmudgeon, and he wasn't a social creature at all, and he really didn't know what to think of us being around, but he was welcoming enough because it was his baby sister. And he tried to reach out, and he saw that I was very niche and I was interested in these things. I'm going to go out and play in the riverbed and go check out the farmland and everything that's close by during the day, but at night, the kid's still wound up. How's a kid going to wind down? And so I guess my mother must have told him he really loves anything that has to do with records and record collecting and music, and even records that are storytelling. So I've got my little phonograph, and it runs on D cells or whatever, and he just comes out and he says, I got something I think you'll like, check these out, and plops down on a cot a stack of Murray Hill box collections of the Shadow, the Green Hornet, Fibber McGee and Molly, the Marx Brothers, and a whole comedy set of just various shows like Burns and Allen and Allen's Alley and Lum and Abner and all of that. So I'm very excited by this. I'd never discovered old time radio before, and so I'm listening to these records at night, and they're like listening to a Disneyland Storyteller album, but they're a little bit more grown than that, and it still have a very comic book kind of quality, and it was all very fascinating and new to me. And so from then on, I'm at the flea market when I'm looking around. Anytime I came across old time radio shows, I grabbed them up, and I still do to this day. And at this point, between that and doing trading with people online and everything, I've collected somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 or 8,000 broadcasts. So I thought, I'll get the ones that are most interesting and share those here on Weird Spins. And so I hope everyone continues to enjoy those. I just want you to be able to surf in and explore as you go. Now, as for the 78s, to this day, only recently did I start really taking an interest in collecting 78s more specifically, and actually digging through them when they turn up. Usually if I found them, I'd just look for Vogues and then move on, or things that were like that, because I just love those. But I like a lot of swing, I like a lot of big band, and I discovered them through listening to stuff that he had there. But I can get Glenn Miller on CD or on LP compilations on the Victor label or whatever. So they're going to be in a higher quality because they come from original studio master tapes, and they're compiled together, so it's not a quick turnover every 3 minutes. I had an opportunity, go pick up a box of Rescue 78s, and I was off to the races. And much of the stuff was non-electric recordings prior to 1925. And it's like, gee, not only is this stuff I'm not going to find on CD, but I'm finding only minimal information about the artist online and not this particular recording. This artist has 12 records listed on Discogs, and this is not one of them. Let me check this out. And I started realizing a lot of this stuff is pretty obscure and pretty interesting. But it started because of my uncle. Because the next thing he turned me on to was this enormous cabinet Victrola phonograph that he had. And it had the crank that you had to plug into the side, and then you would wind it up, and full 12-inch size turntable. And underneath was the horn, which was very loud, and a pretty good collection of probably between 75 and 178 RPM records. And I think while I was there in the evenings, by having allergy sniffles brought on from all of the dust and dirt in this underlit hoarder's mess of a cabin, and under the dim, eerie lights of the pine-scented lanterns, from the pine smell coming from them being kerosene operated, I was just thrown into the past with old-time radio and 78 RPM records, and I swear I played every single thing that was there no less than 3 times, and fell in love with some of them. In particular, I remember an interpretation of Slow Boat to China that I thought was fantastic, and loving a version of That Old Black Magic that was done by Sammy Davis Jr. But now I'm finding all this 20s stuff, and the beauty of this is, as I'm discovering it, I can share it with you again, real time. So the very night I've posted is the first time I've heard it, and it can be the first time you've heard it. So a new record will be coming down, or at least a new side, every day for as long as I can manage to get them transferred and keep them up. Now, I was planning on doing the 78s before this, but my Samsung Galaxy, which was I think a 9, or it was either a 9 or a 10, it died. And I got a new one, which I think is the 23. I'm not sure, but it does not have a mic and headphone port on it at all. So where I was patching 2 phonographs before direct, I didn't really have a way of doing that with this phone. My main turntable that I use for all of my albums is quality. It's got a magnetic cartridge, it sounds great, and it's a 2-speed. So I can't use it for the 78s. Even though it's got Bluetooth, useless, no 78. I bought the Crosley to make it specific to 78 RPM records, and I showed that one. I played the 107-year-old record or whatever. Finding a stylus that was correct for it was proving to be a real pain, because I found one for it that said it was a 78 stylus, and then it turned out that it wasn't. Finally, I found a proper 3mm stylus, and it was from an import company, I think from Sweden or Switzerland or something, and tried to put it on, and it didn't fit. And it said that it would fit Crosley's. Well, it turns out that this particular model has a slightly fragmentally different cartridge on it, and they don't make a 78 RPM stylus for it anywhere, period, even though it plays 78s. And when you contact Crosley, they just go, well, the LP stylus that's on there can be used for playing 78s. Maybe so, but far from perfectly compared to what they would sound like with the proper stylus. It's almost 3 times as wide, if not more. So now I find this stylus and I'm stuck with it, and I can't get it to go on there. But I found a note online from somebody posting in a thread just a few days ago, like a week ago, and it said, none of these will fit, but if you take a file to them, you can file the back and then snap it into place, because it'll size it properly. Well, thank goodness I have a little dog and an electric nail file. So in all of 30 seconds, I was able to file that stylus down on the back end of it and snap it into place, and now it fits the cartridge. Next step was going on to Amazon and just moving back and forth and figuring out what bits and pieces I would need to put together to be able to do a direct transfer of sound into the phone from a headphone port via USB. So that's what I've done, which gives me an upgrade over what was done a few days ago when I did Ultimate 78's Hall Part 2, and I showed a pretty interesting record from 1907 that is Columbia Records' introduction to the idea of a double disc. And by that they were meaning a record that actually has recorded material on both sides. The transfer that I did there was open air, and it's pretty miserable. So tonight I've recaptured it, and I'm still tweaking, setting my levels and getting it to go. But I've recaptured it, and I'm going to share it with you here. That's going to be the first side that's shared for Shellac Spins. Is that advertising matter for the introduction from Columbia of the two-sided record from 1907. So repeat on that just for the first night, and then from now on for each night, as long as I'm able to, I'll be uploading a new side, and it may be a ballad, it may be a foxtrot, it may be a novelty vaudeville song. Whatever you get, you get. I'm going to try to go through the entire collection eventually, which right now is 6 pretty good sized milk crates full of records. So there's a lot to go through there, and it should last for a couple of years at least before I see any end to what I can upload without running into any problems with YouTube. So I hope you enjoy that stuff. Now, I will be doing other YouTube videos in between of regular collecting, my progressive art rock stuff, the soundtrack stuff, the horror movies. I've got plans on sharing a community access cable television show from a friend who was a horror host who is no longer with us, and I may have to do something with Patreon or something to be able to do that over copyright issues. But I have the entire collection of all of the lower grade but existing masters of his show, and so I'd like to be able to share those with the world, because I think he would like for them to continue to be seen. And that was Hayden Milligan as Zombie, hosting horror movies in his community in Kentucky years ago. So hopefully I'll be able to bring that back and share it here as well. Also, in the past, I did a tribute album in collaboration with Sean Smith Lewis, who contemporarily has Ibon Press, or did have I don't know what he's doing now, but he, through Ibon and Grindhouse, does have on Record Store Day coming up the domestic American version of the soundtrack to Lucio Fulci's The Beyond Under 7 Doors of Death, which is different from the actual Beyond version by Fabio Frizzi. And that's coming out on Record Store Day this year by Mitch and Ira something. I'm embarrassed, but anyway, just look up 7 Doors of Death. It's a must-have. It's going to be a great soundtrack edition to have. I'm hoping that, against anything, that I'm lucky enough to get my hands on one, because it's a very small pressing and I would love to have one in my collection. So that's coming up down the road from them. But I'm going back to, we did a tribute album called For Lucio Fulci, A Symphony of Fear. It was a double disc. There were a lot of recordings that were done for it that we simply couldn't fit in. Some of it was music, some of it was supplemental interviews and commentaries. So I'll be posting those here for those of the fans that are into film music and interesting prog rock and horror movie stuff. That will be available here as well, free to just click and listen. So there's going to be a lot of free click and listen stuff coming up on Weird Spins, as well as my usual vinyl community and movie community sharing of CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, vinyl records, and 78 RPM special finds. But welcome to the first Shellac spin in this series, and from now on they'll be much shorter, probably 2 to 4 minutes in length, but I just wanted to get all of this off my chest, share it with you guys, and here we go. Here's Columbia's introduction to the two-sided record, and in much better quality than it was on the Ultimate 78 Hall Part 2. Ultimate 78 Hall Part 3 will come up in a couple of weeks, maybe 3, I don't know. I've got another entire box to go through. See you real soon.
The other side of this sample Columbia record, aboard the best possible evidence of the quality of Columbia recording. It demonstrates the faithfulness of our reproduction of the singing voice, and it is typical of the quality of every record in the entire Columbia list. The standard price of 10-inch Columbia dubs is 65 cents. As an interesting experiment, as well as a demonstration of the Columbia process of recording instrumental music, you will now hear some of the instruments of the Columbia Orchestra, commencing with the first violin and adding successively the second violin, the viola, cello, flute, bass, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, French horn, bells, cornets, and trombones. Listen carefully and see if you can detect the exact moment at which each instrument is introduced. A point to remember, Columbia double disc records may be played on either Columbia or Victor machines, and they will unfailingly outwear any other record.